I never imagined my life could unravel in just a few weeks. My wife, Sarah, and I had always been in sync, or so I thought. We'd been married for over a decade, a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and trust. But cracks in that facade appeared when we began visiting a new doctor, Dr. Marcus, a charismatic physician who came highly recommended when Sarah started experiencing persistent back pain. The first time I noticed something odd was during our third visit to his office. Marcus was overly friendly, his hand lingering just a bit too long on Sarah's shoulder as he explained her treatment plan. Sarah laughed more at his jokes than she ever had at mine. I tried to brush it off. After all, Marcus was a professional, and I wasn't about to start questioning my wife's loyalty over an innocent interaction. But then there were her texts. Late at night, her phone would buzz, and she'd tilt the screen away from me, a sly smile playing on her lips. When I asked about it, she dismissed my concerns. "It's just work stuff," she'd say, or "Kathy from yoga sent me a meme." I didn't press, at least not yet. One evening, while Sarah was in the shower, her phone buzzed again. The notification caught my eye, a text from a number not saved in her contacts, reading, "Can't wait for tomorrow. You're a natural." My stomach sank. I didn't have to be a detective to know this wasn't just about yoga or work. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to be sure. My suspicion was the beginning of a journey I never wanted to take. The text gnawed at me for days. "You're a natural." Natural at what? My mind raced through every possibility, each more unsettling than the last. Sarah's demeanor had shifted too. She seemed distracted, her laughter too frequent, her smiles too automatic. I started piecing together the timeline. The changes in her behavior had coincided with our visits to Dr. Marcus. That Friday, Sarah mentioned she'd be home late from a work thing. The timing was perfect. Once she left, I grabbed her laptop, which she often left logged in. The moment I opened her messages, my heart froze. The text exchanges between her and a number saved as Dr. M weren't even subtle. There were inside jokes, compliments about her appearance, and plans for upcoming sessions. One video file caught my attention. It wasn't labeled, but the timestamp showed it had been sent earlier that week. My hand shook as I clicked play. The screen revealed Sarah in Dr. Marcus's office. They were laughing, but then the camera angle shifted. Sarah was on the examination table, leaning in close to Marcus. I stopped the video, ball rising in my throat. I couldn't watch anymore. The reality of her betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. My wife wasn't just cheating. She and Marcus were recording it, mocking the very trust one thought we had. But this wasn't the time for emotions to cloud my judgment. I knew I had to act carefully. Revenge was already forming in my mind, but I needed more proof. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, and began to plan my next move. Knowing the truth about Sarah's betrayal left me hollow, but I wasn't going to let emotions dictate my next steps. I needed undeniable evidence, something so damning that neither she nor Dr. Marcus could talk their way out of it. My thoughts were razor-sharp, fueled by anger and heartbreak, as I plotted my approach. I set up hidden cameras in our home. They were discreetly placed, one in the living room, another near our bedroom doorway. I even installed a keylogger on her laptop, ensuring I'd have access to every conversation and email. While it felt invasive, I justified my actions by reminding myself of their deceit. If they were bold enough to record themselves, they wouldn't hesitate to take further risks. A few days later, Sarah's excuses to leave the house grew bolder. She claimed she was meeting a friend, but I tracked her phone's location. It pinged at Dr. Marcus's office late in the evening. That was the last confirmation I needed. That night, when Sarah returned home, she kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had changed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she chuckled at the message before slipping away to the bedroom. My stomach churned as I glanced at my own phone, where the cameras in the house streamed live. I clicked the feed, confirming my worst fears. She had been texting Marcus again. By now, I had amassed enough evidence. It wasn't just for me. I wanted Sarah to understand the magnitude of her betrayal. But the real climax would come when I exposed them both, publicly if necessary. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. Timing was everything, and I needed my plan for revenge to be flawless. The cameras had done their job, and the evidence was mounting. I watched as Sarah brought Marcus into our home one afternoon when she thought I was at work. Seeing them together, laughing, and moving through our shared space as if I didn't exist, was the ultimate slap in the face. Marcus even brought his phone, setting it on the table to record as they disappeared into the bedroom. I felt sick but steeled myself. I wasn't going to lose control. Instead, I downloaded every video and copied every message I had gathered. I saved them to multiple locations, external drives, cloud storage, even a backup email account I created specifically for this purpose. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to ensure they couldn't wriggle their way out of the consequences. The opportunity for confrontation presented itself sooner than expected. Marcus and Sarah had planned another rendezvous at our house, while I was supposed to be working late. This time, I left my car at a friend's house and returned home on foot. I snuck inside, my adrenaline spiking as I heard muffled voices and laughter from the bedroom. I waited until I knew the moment was right. They wouldn't see it coming. But my plan wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about exposing their betrayal in a way they would never forget. By the time I left the house that evening, I would no longer be the wronged husband. They would be the ones paying the price. For now, I sat silently in the living room, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter their facade. Revenge was within reach, and I was prepared to seize it. As I sat in the living room, their muffled voices grew louder, accompanied by laughter. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair, every fiber of my being screaming at me to burst into the bedroom and end it then and there. But I waited. Timing was everything. Finally, I heard the telltale sound of Marcus's phone camera being activated. It was time. I stood, taking measured steps toward the bedroom. With one hand, I opened the door. The scene was just as damning as I'd imagined. Marcus holding his phone, Sarah laughing and leaning against him, both caught entirely off guard by my sudden appearance. The color drained from Sarah's face as her eyes met mine. Marcus, on the other hand, looked more annoyed than alarmed, as if I were the intruder. "What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus demanded, attempting to shield his phone. I said nothing at first, only pulling out my own phone and hitting play. The sound of their laughter and the sight of their earlier exploits filled the room as I showed them one of the recordings I had downloaded. Sarah's face crumbled, her expression shifting from shock to shame in an instant. "You're filming each other while you betray me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But don't worry, I've got my own footage now," Sarah stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can explain." "No," I cut her off sharply. "You don't get to explain anything. You get to leave. Both of you." Marcus scoffed, trying to maintain his composure. "You don't scare me." "Good," I replied with a cold smile. "Because you should be scared of what's coming next." I turned and left the room, ignoring their protests. In that moment, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. Exposing their betrayal wasn't enough. I was going to make sure they both felt the weight of their actions in ways they couldn't escape. I left the house without another word, giving Sarah and Marcus no chance to recover from the shock. My hands were still shaking as I got into my car and drove a short distance to a nearby park. I needed to calm down, but the fire in my chest wouldn't let me rest. Revenge wasn't going to end with the confrontation. I opened my laptop, connected to my private storage, and drafted an email. Attached were the most damning videos and screenshots I had collected. The email had two recipients: the board of the hospital where Marcus worked and Sarah's closest friends, people she confided in for years. If they thought their actions were safe behind closed doors, they were sorely mistaken. After sending the email, I contacted a lawyer. The divorce was inevitable, but I wanted to ensure it left no room for Sarah to contest my claims. The lawyer, already familiar with cases like mine, reassured me that the evidence I had was more than enough to protect my interests. We began drafting the paperwork that evening. The next day, the consequences of my actions began to unfold. Sarah tried to call me, first once, then several times in rapid succession. I ignored every attempt. My phone buzzed with messages, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Marcus's response was predictable: a short, threatening text demanding I delete the videos and stop playing games. I laughed at his desperation. By midday, word had spread. One of Sarah's friends, who had received the email, sent me a message. "I can't believe what she's done to you. You deserve better." At the same time, Marcus's hospital board began their internal investigation. His career, much like my marriage, was in ruins. The revenge I had set in motion was swift and relentless. But as satisfying as it was to see the consequences of their betrayal, I knew this was just the beginning of a much longer battle. For now, though, I savored the silence from the house I no longer considered a home. By the evening, Sarah's attempts to contact me had escalated. Her messages shifted from frantic apologies to pleas for a face-to-face conversation. The tone of her calls turned desperate. I could almost hear her tears through the voicemail she left. "Please, can we talk? I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. I made a mistake, but I love you. You can't just throw away everything we've built together." Her words stirred something in me, but it wasn't compassion. It was disdain. A mistake, she called it, as if months of deception and betrayal could be so easily dismissed. Still, I didn't block her. I wanted her to feel every ounce of shame as the fallout continued to spread. By the second day, the consequences of her actions began hitting closer to home. Sarah's workplace had apparently caught wind of the scandal. Someone from her circle must have shared the videos or details from my email. She messaged me about it. "How could you? I'm going to lose my job." It was laughable how quickly her remorse turned to self-pity. She was more concerned about her reputation than the destruction of our marriage. Meanwhile, Marcus wasn't faring any better. A friend who worked in the hospital system messaged me privately. "Your doctor's not looking so high and mighty anymore. Word is, he's been suspended while they investigate. What exactly did you send them?" I replied simply, "The truth." Sarah showed up at the house that evening, ignoring the fact that I had told her to leave. She stood on the front lawn, tears streaming down her face, pleading for me to come outside. When I refused to respond, she tried pounding on the door. "You can't just shut me out like this. We're married." The irony of her statement almost made me laugh. Married? Not in any way that mattered anymore. I watched her from the window, a hollow figure of the woman I once loved. After half an hour, she gave up and left. I didn't feel relief. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. But I wasn't done yet. Marcus and Sarah had taken so much from me, and I wasn't going to stop until they felt the weight of their betrayal fully. As the days passed, the wheels of my revenge continued turning. My lawyer had already filed the divorce papers, citing Sarah's infidelity with evidence attached. The recordings, messages, and timeline painted a crystal-clear picture of her betrayal. In our state, her actions were grounds for significant penalties in the division of assets. She wouldn't get away with leaving me emotionally wrecked and financially unstable. Sarah attempted to stall the process. She sent messages insisting we could work things out and begged me not to finalize the divorce. But I saw through her. The cracks in her facade weren't remorse. They were panic. She had underestimated my resolve, and now the reality of her choices was closing in. Meanwhile, Marcus's career was unraveling. My lawyer had forwarded the evidence to the hospital board, including a detailed statement explaining how their affair had involved inappropriate behavior within his professional capacity. His suspension became indefinite, pending the outcome of their investigation. Rumors swirled that he'd already been quietly blacklisted from other facilities in the area. Through it all, Sarah tried to regain control, her tactics shifting between playing the victim and outright manipulation. She even reached out to mutual friends, spinning the narrative to make me appear as the vindictive, overreacting husband. One friend, Melissa, sent me a screenshot of Sarah's messages. "He's blowing everything out of proportion. Yes, I made a mistake, but he's trying to ruin my life. Can you believe he sent videos to people? Who does that?" Melissa's reply was scathing. "Who cheats on their husband with a married doctor and records it? You deserve everything that's happening to you." Sarah's web of lies was rapidly collapsing, and her support system was eroding as more people learned the truth. But I wasn't stopping there. Marcus still had his reputation to protect, and I knew hitting him where it hurt most. His public image would be the final nail in his professional coffin. I began preparing one last move that would ensure neither of them walked away unscathed. By now, Sarah and Marcus were scrambling to salvage the wreckage of their lives. Marcus's hospital board had initiated formal disciplinary proceedings, while Sarah's reputation among friends and colleagues was in tatters. But I knew the final blow had to be public, a reckoning neither of them could escape. Using the evidence I had meticulously gathered, I created an anonymous account on a popular social media platform. The post was direct and devoid of emotion, laying out the affair's details, backed by censored screenshots and text evidence. I withheld the most explicit material but left enough to ensure there was no denying the truth. Local doctor, married patient, the caption read, followed by the damning story. Within hours, the post started gaining traction. People shared it, commented, and discussed the shocking betrayal. While I didn't name Marcus or Sarah outright, the context made it easy for those familiar with them to connect the dots. The reaction was swift. Former patients of Marcus began recounting their discomfort with his overly familiar behavior. Others from Sarah's workplace commented on her uncharacteristic absences and excuses over the past months. Strangers added their disgust, lamenting the collapse of morality and professionalism. Both Marcus and Sarah reached out to me within hours of the post gaining steam. Marcus's message was short and venomous. "You've crossed the line. I'll see you in court for defamation." I ignored it, knowing the evidence I had was airtight. His threats were as hollow as his promises of discretion. Sarah, on the other hand, sent a flurry of texts and voicemails. "How could you do this? You're destroying me. Please, take it down. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want." What I wanted, she couldn't give me. Trust, love, fidelity. Those were dead, killed by her own actions. The fallout reached a new peak the following day when Marcus's hospital publicly announced his termination. Local news outlets picked up the story, with headlines about an inappropriate relationship between a physician and patient. Marcus's career, once his pride, was in ruins. Sarah wasn't spared, either. Her employer put her on indefinite leave pending an internal review, and mutual friends who hadn't already distanced themselves now refused to associate with her. She was isolated, her carefully constructed image shattered. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a grim sense of closure. The damage they inflicted on my life was permanent, but at least they wouldn't escape without consequences. Yet, there was still one thing left to do to reclaim my sense of control and peace. The tipping point came when Sarah showed up at my parents' house uninvited. My mother called me, her voice uneasy, saying Sarah was in tears, begging for a chance to explain herself. I told my mother not to let her in and promised to handle it. When I arrived, Sarah was sitting on the porch, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw not my wife but a stranger, a desperate, cornered stranger. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded, standing as I approached. "There's nothing left to explain, Sarah," I said coldly. "Everyone knows the truth now. I don't need your excuses." "But it wasn't like that," she stammered. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just got out of hand." I laughed bitterly. "Got out of hand? You didn't just betray me, Sarah. You mocked our life together. You laughed and filmed it as if what we built meant nothing to you." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. I handed her a folder containing the divorce papers I had filed. "Here, sign these and stop embarrassing yourself. This is over." She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. "I don't want a divorce," she whispered. "You lost that choice the moment you let him into our bed," I snapped, stepping closer. "This isn't just about revenge, Sarah. It's about accountability. You and Marcus thought you could play with people's lives like it didn't matter. Well, now you see the cost." She sank to her knees, clutching the folder, as if physically unable to accept the finality of my words. I walked past her, into my parents' house, and closed the door. Inside, my mother looked at me with concern. "Are you sure about this, son?" "Yes," I said firmly. "She made her choices. I'm just making mine." As I drove away later that evening, I reflected on how far I'd come since the day I discovered her betrayal. The man I was before would have begged for answers, tried to salvage what was unsalvageable. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who understood the power of walking away from people who broke you. Sarah's breakdown was the climax of her reckoning. I had exposed her for who she was, and now she had to live with it. My revenge was complete, but my journey to healing was just beginning. With Sarah out of my life, there was one final loose end to tie up: Marcus. His threats of legal action had been nothing more than hollow posturing, but I wanted to ensure there would be no more surprises from him. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming my peace. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a small cafe near the hospital where Marcus had worked before his termination. He arrived, looking disheveled and tired, a far cry from the smug, confident man who had mocked me in my own home. "What do you want, buddy?" he asked, his tone attempting to mask the nervous edge in his voice. "Closure," I replied, sitting across from him. "And to make sure we're clear, you're done interfering in my life. No more messages, no more threats." Marcus scoffed, trying to regain his composure. "You think you've won because you ruined my career? You've made your point. What more could you possibly want?" I leaned in, meeting his gaze with unflinching intensity. "What I wanted was justice. What I want now is to make sure you understand that if you come near me or involve yourself with Sarah again, I won't hesitate to escalate things further. You lost your license, Marcus. You don't want to lose more." His bravado cracked, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, looking down at the table. "It was just supposed to be a fling. I didn't think." "No, you didn't think," I interrupted. "You didn't think about the lives you were destroying, the trust you shattered. You acted like a man who thought he'd never face consequences. Well, here we are." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. "This isn't a negotiation, Marcus. You're going to stay away from me, from Sarah, from my life. If you don't, I'll make sure your name becomes synonymous with disgrace in this town. Are we clear?" He nodded reluctantly, muttering a defeated, "Fine." Satisfied, I stood and threw a few bills on the table to cover my coffee. "Good. Now disappear, Marcus. You're not worth any more of my time." As I walked out of the cafe, a sense of finality washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Marcus was no longer a threat, and Sarah was out of my life for good. Now, it was time to focus on the future. A future free from betrayal and deceit. The battle was over, and though I bore scars, I was finally free. The chaos of the last few weeks began to settle, leaving behind a strange calm. It wasn't the peace I had hoped for, but a void where the weight of anger and betrayal used to reside. The house, once filled with shared memories and laughter, felt eerily quiet, like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I started cleaning out the remnants of my past with Sarah. Her clothes, photos, and personal items were packed up and sent to her sister's house, ensuring she wouldn't have an excuse to return. Each box I taped shut felt like sealing away another piece of our life together. A cathartic but painful process. The silence, however, forced me to confront emotions I had pushed aside during my quest for revenge. I had spent so much time focused on exposing Sarah and Marcus that I hadn't truly dealt with the heartbreak. Nights were the hardest, filled with the echoes of her laughter and the memory of what we once shared. It was grief, raw and unrelenting. But amidst the pain, I found small moments of clarity. Friends who had initially been hesitant to choose sides began to reach out, offering support and encouraging me to move forward. One night, my best friend Greg showed up unannounced with takeout and a six-pack. "You're not spending another night brooding," he declared, setting the food on the coffee table. "We're going to eat, drink, and talk about literally anything else." It was a small gesture, but it reminded me I wasn't alone. People cared, and they were willing to help me rebuild, even if I didn't know where to start. Work became another refuge. Throwing myself into projects kept my mind occupied and gave me a sense of purpose. My boss, aware of what had happened, offered me a chance to lead a new team. It was a daunting challenge, but one I welcomed. It was an opportunity to prove to myself that I could thrive despite everything. Slowly, the pieces of my life began to rearrange themselves. The road ahead was far from clear, but I started to see glimmers of hope. The scars Sarah and Marcus had left wouldn't fade overnight, but they no longer defined me. I was more than the betrayal. more than the heartbreak. I was still standing, ready to rebuild. With the worst behind me, I turned my focus inward, rediscovering who I was without the shadow of Sarah looming over me. For years, my identity had been tied to my role as a husband, a provider, and a partner. Now, I had to figure out who I was as an individual, a man standing on his own 2 feet. I started small. Every morning, I made a list of 3 things to accomplish, whether it was trying a new recipe, hitting the gym, or just organizing a drawer. Those simple tasks gave me a sense of control and momentum. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of forgotten belongings in the attic, I found my old sketchbooks. Art had been a passion of mine in college, something I let slip away as life became busier. Flipping through the pages brought back memories of a time when I felt free to create without judgment or pressure. I picked up a sketchpad and pencil that evening, letting the lines and shapes flow freely. It was awkward at first, rusty hands struggling to recapture an old skill, but soon, the familiar rhythm returned. For the first time in weeks, I lost myself in something other than the pain of the past. I also began reconnecting with old friends. One of them, Mia, reached out after hearing about my ordeal through mutual acquaintances. We hadn't spoken in years, but she invited me to a casual game night she hosted with friends. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to step back into a social circle. But I forced myself to go, knowing I couldn't keep isolating myself forever. The night was simple: laughter, board games, and the kind of camaraderie I hadn't realized I'd missed. Mia and I ended up talking late into the evening about everything from shared memories to the ways life had surprised us. "It's good to see you again," she said, smiling warmly. "You seem lighter, like you're finding yourself again." Her words stayed with me as I drove home. She was right. The person I had been before Sarah's betrayal, the person who loved art, who laughed easily, who saw the world as full of possibilities, was still there. I just had to uncover him. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. Life hadn't ended with Sarah's betrayal. It was simply beginning anew. Weeks turned into months, and the whirlwind of emotions that once dominated my days began to settle. I wouldn't say I was healed. It wasn't that simple, but I was no longer consumed by the betrayal. The anger, the sorrow, the endless questioning of why had started to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward. Sarah signed the divorce papers after weeks of resistance. There was no final showdown, no grand apology. She sent them back with a short note that read, "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but I appreciated the gesture. For the first time, her words didn't feel manipulative or self-serving. They felt human. It was a reminder that as much as I resented her actions, she had once been someone I loved. Letting go of that bitterness was more for me than for her. It was the key to finding peace. With the legalities of our separation finalized, I decided it was time to reclaim my home. The house, once filled with memories of our life together, had felt like a mausoleum for too long. I redecorated, starting with the bedroom. The walls that once bore Sarah's carefully chosen artwork were now painted a fresh, soothing green. New furniture replaced the old, erasing traces of a life that no longer existed. I also found closure in Marcus's downfall. His termination from the hospital had been the end of his career in the city, and I learned through mutual acquaintances that he had moved away, trying to start fresh somewhere else. Knowing he was gone brought a sense of relief, a chapter firmly closed. Surprisingly, Sarah herself reached out one last time. It was a simple email. "I've started therapy and am trying to understand what I did and why I hurt you. I know I can't fix what's broken, but I wanted you to know I'm working on myself. I hope you find happiness." I didn't respond. There was no need to. Her journey was hers to take, just as mine was mine. Closure wasn't a single moment but a series of small decisions. The decision to paint a wall, to walk outside on a sunny day, to meet a friend for coffee. Each step, no matter how small, was a declaration that I was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. It wasn't a grand revelation or a sudden epiphany. It was the accumulation of small victories that finally led me to a place of peace. The betrayal, the pain, and the chaos that had defined my life for months now felt like distant echoes. They were still a part of my story, but they no longer defined me. One sunny morning, I decided to visit a nearby trail I'd loved in my youth. It was the kind of place where the world seemed to slow down, where the rustling leaves and distant chirping birds offered solace that no words could provide. As I walked, I realized I hadn't just been rebuilding my life. I'd been rediscovering my strength. The solitude gave me time to reflect. The man who had once been consumed by anger and a thirst for revenge had grown. I didn't regret standing up for myself or exposing the betrayal, but I no longer felt tied to the outcome. Sarah and Marcus were chapters one had closed, and I was free to write the rest of my story. Later that week, I attended another game night at Mia's. What had started as casual reconnecting had evolved into a deeper friendship. She had become one of my biggest supporters, someone who saw me for who I was, not as a broken man recovering from infidelity, but as someone with a future worth embracing. As the evening wore on, Mia pulled me aside. "You're smiling more these days," she said, her eyes sparkling. "It suits you." I laughed. "I guess I finally have a reason to. Maybe it's time to focus on what's next instead of what's behind," she said gently. Her words stuck with me. What was next? For the first time, the question didn't scare me. It excited me. In the days that followed, I took steps toward building a new life. I joined a local art group and started working on a series of sketches inspired by my journey. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in years, rebuilding relationships that had faded over time. One evening, I looked at the blank canvas of my future and realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The pain hadn't destroyed me. It had transformed me. As I stood on the edge of this new beginning, I felt a surge of hope. Life was waiting, full of possibilities I hadn't yet explored. And this time, I was ready.